Hi again, Risa here, back with another episode of Ask Risa. This is my weekly video series where I answer some common wedding planning questions and provide advice. This is part 2 in what is going to be a 3-part series. So if you missed last week's video, it was all about what does a wedding planner do? And this week I'm going to talk about what does a wedding coordinator do? There is a difference between a planner and a coordinator. There is also some overlap. So I will talk about coordination today, and I will explain to you where the overlap is between a coordinator and a planner. And then next week, I will be talking about what the difference is between a venue coordinator, a person who works in-house at the venue where you're getting married, and a coordinator that you hire independently who works for themselves. So, first things first, do not call it a day of coordinator. I am going to get on my high horse for a minute here and talk about why there's no such thing as a day of coordinator. It's because your wedding is extremely complicated. There are so many vendors involved. There are so many moving pieces. There's so much going on. There's literally no way someone can just show up on your wedding day and make all that happen. There is a lot of background information that we need in order to make your wedding day run smoothly. I spend a lot of time leading up to the wedding day with my coordination clients, working behind the scenes and getting information from them and meeting with them and asking a lot of questions, because the best way to be prepared for contingencies is to ask questions. That way, if something comes up at the last minute, you as the coordinator are prepared to handle it without having to impose on the bride or the groom too much. So, one of the most valuable things that a wedding coordinator does, and a wedding planner does this too, is provide your day of timeline. Weddings are highly complex events, and like I said before, there's a lot of moving pieces, there's a lot happening. So having a schedule in place is massively important. Literally nothing will happen if you don't have it mapped out on your timeline, and your wedding coordinator will create that timeline for you. Now, you might be thinking, oh, well, my photographer said they're going to prepare a timeline for me, or my DJ said they're going to prepare a timeline for me. That's all well and good, but they're not going to prepare the kind of timeline that a coordinator or a planner is going to prepare for you. And that is not at all meant to be disrespectful. I'm not throwing shade at photographers or DJs, but that's not their job. They're going to focus on what they need to do. So your photographer is going to focus on the timeline from his or her perspective, what needs to be photographed, the first look, and the family photos and things like that. The DJ is going to focus on the ceremony and the special moments like the cake cutting and the first dance and things like that. The planner or coordinator is going to focus on all that stuff too, but they're going to focus on everything from start to finish. They're going to focus on the hair and makeup schedule. They're going to focus on all the delivery times. They're going to focus on when the catering is going to put out the salads and when the entrees are going to come out. And they're going to focus on grand send-offs at the end of the night, if there is one, any special surprises that your parents or somebody might be planning for you. The coordinator is going to make sure that those are in there as well. So your coordinator is getting way down into the nitty-gritty. Like literally everything that happens on your wedding day goes into the timeline when I prepare a timeline for you. Whereas one of your other vendors preparing the timeline, that's not their job. Their job is not to prepare a complete start to finish timeline for you. Their job is to focus on their specific niche, like photography or music or whatever. So don't just rely on your DJ or your photographer to make your timeline. You really do need a person whose job it is to do that. It also makes your DJ and photographer, it frees them up a little bit to focus on what's really important to them, playing music and taking photos, and not making sure that things are happening on time according to the timeline. So that's something to think about. We also, as coordinators, focus on the ceremony and the choreography of the ceremony and where people are going to stand and what's going to happen when, and the handoff from the father of the bride to the groom, if that's all happening, that sort of thing. So we just focus on a lot of details that aren't necessarily the responsibility of your other vendors. We also make sure that all of the other vendors are on the same page. So we make sure that if the cake's being delivered at a certain time, but the florist is putting the flowers on the cake, we make sure that the florist and the bakery know when each other is going to be there so that that can happen when it's supposed to. And, we make sure that the photographer and the DJ both know when all those special moments are happening so that everybody's prepared. And we also, as the wedding is unfolding, I would never let a first dance happen without first just double checking with the photographer and the videographer and the DJ to make sure, okay, videographer, do you have your lights set up and are your cameras ready to go? Photographer, are you ready? Like, do you have the right lenses? Are you good to go? Do you need to do anything before we do this first dance? DJ, do you have the song queued up? Like, are you prepared for this? I like to touch base with everybody to make sure everyone's prepared for what happens next. So that is another thing that a coordinator does that your other vendors aren't going to be able to do because they're worried about doing their job. That it's not their job to make sure that all the other vendors are ready for the special moment. It's their job to make sure they're ready for the special moment and to do whatever it is they need to do for that special moment. Your coordinator's job is to make sure everybody's ready and make sure everybody's on the same page. So an analogy that I like to use is think about an orchestra. So you have all of your instruments and everybody has their part to play. But without the conductor, everybody's going to be doing their own thing. The conductor keeps them on pace, tells the horn section when to come in, tells strings when to get loud, when to get quiet. If you don't have a conductor, you've just got noise. You've got a bunch of instruments, everybody's doing their own thing, and it's noise. Once you add a conductor to the recipe, then you have music. You have created something that is coherent and cohesive and plays well together. Same thing with your wedding. You've got a team of vendors. They all are playing their own instrument. They've got their own things to worry about. You need a coordinator who is the conductor who's going to make all those different vendors play well together and make your wedding go smoothly and happen the way you want it to. And so you might be thinking, well, my mom can do all this stuff or my auntie can do all this stuff. No, they can't. They can, but they're not going to have any fun at your wedding because you cannot both be a coordinator and a guest at a wedding. It's just not possible. You can't have any fun if you're also working. And so if you want your mom and your auntie to have fun and relax and have a good time at your wedding, then do not ask them to be your wedding coordinator because they won't have any fun. They'll be too busy answering questions, keeping everybody on time, making sure things are running smoothly. That is the job of a wedding coordinator. So that is why you need a wedding coordinator. And if you've hired a planner, the planner does all of this stuff too. Last week I talked about all the other stuff that the planner does, mainly in the months and sometimes years leading up to the wedding. But once you get a little closer to the wedding, the overlap is very strong between what a planner does and what a coordinator does. So that's another thing to keep in mind. The other thing that a coordinator does that, your mom or your auntie isn't necessarily going to be able to do for you is run your rehearsal. And this is super important if you don't have a professional clergy person performing your ceremony. So if you've got a friend or a family member who got ordained on the internet, great, no problem. Do that all the time, except this is probably the first wedding they've done, or maybe they've done like one or two before, but they are not professional clergy people. They do not do wedding ceremonies all the time. And so you need somebody running your rehearsal and choreographing your ceremony who knows what they're doing. And again, the coordinator or the planner will know that. We do lots of these. We've seen everything. We know what needs to be done and what needs to be rehearsed. We help people figure out where they're going to stand. We run through the highlights of the ceremony. We practice, passing the rings from the best man to the officiant if the best man's holding them. We practice the bouquet handoff. We practice walking in. We practice walking out. And you wouldn't think that those are things that need to be practiced, but they are. And your coordinator or planner will run that rehearsal for you. And even if you don't have a wedding party, it's still useful to have a wedding rehearsal. If anybody is walking down the aisle, which somebody probably is, whether it's the groom, the bride and her dad, parents, siblings, even if they're not official wedding party, if they're walking down the aisle, then you need to practice that, and you need to run through the positioning of everyone and logistics and things like that. So another useful thing that a wedding coordinator does. Also, during setup, there are always questions that come up. Vendors always have questions. It's just the way it goes. Once you get in the space and you start actually putting things where they're supposed to go, questions arise. So if you have a coordinator on hand, they can be the point person for that. Otherwise, your vendors are going to be texting you. You're going to be trying to get hair and makeup done. You're going to be getting all these text messages from your DJ and your florist and the bakery, and it just gonna annoy you. Honestly, you should be able to just sit back, relax, get pampered, maybe drink a little champagne, hang out with your sisters or your mom or your bridesmaids, whoever is spending time with you while you're getting ready. You don't want to be fielding all of those questions. Not to mention, there's a lot of stuff that has to be set up that isn't necessarily going to be done by any of your vendors, like your guest book and your seating chart and your table numbers and your programs and your favors and your signage. It's not your florist's responsibility to set those things up. It's not the venue's responsibility to set those things up. It's not the caterer's responsibility to set those things up. So unless you hire a coordinator, who's going to be setting that stuff up? You are, or your mom, or your cousin, or your bridesmaids. But you know what? Those people all have other stuff they want to be doing. Everybody wants to be getting ready to look their best at your wedding and getting ready to have fun and relax. So again, it's better to just hire a person whose job it is to set all that stuff up so that nobody in your family has to worry about it. And you don't have to worry about them not doing it right, because, you know, wedding coordinators, we do this all the time. We have an eye for what looks good. So we're going to set up your things in a way that is aesthetically pleasing and it will look pretty. And if you rely on your cousin to do it, God only knows what's going to happen. No offense to your cousin, but maybe she just doesn't have an eye for that stuff. So it's best to have a professional. That's the whole upshot of this is hire professionals for your wedding, and you will not be sad about it. You will not regret it, I assure you. So then, of course, your coordinator or your planner, once everything's set up, all the questions are answered, they just keep things moving. They keep things going on schedule. That's what that timeline is for. They make sure that the first dance happens when it's supposed to. They make sure that the cake gets cut when it's supposed to. Like I said earlier, they make sure all the vendors are ready to go when all that stuff happens. I try also to make sure that parents don't miss things like the first dance. If I see a parent wandering off and I know that the first dance is going to be coming up in a couple minutes, I will usually try to retrieve them and be like, oh, hey, by the way, first dance coming up in a minute. I just don't want anybody to miss anything important, especially when it's the parents of the bride or groom who are involved. So that's another thing your coordinator does, is just like run point the whole night, make sure everything goes smoothly. And some coordinators at the end of the night will be there to pack up all your stuff at the end of the night and box it all up for you, whether you're taking it home at the end of the night or if you're leaving it in the venue overnight and picking it up in the morning, something like that. A lot of coordinators and planners will stay till the very end to make sure all the loose ends are tied up, make sure all the vendors get all their stuff out, and make sure all your belongings are accounted for and boxed up for you. And if you have gratuities or final payments that need to be passed out to vendors, then your planner and coordinator can do that too for you. So those are all the ways in which a coordinator can help you. That's what they do versus what a planner does. So pretty much everything that a coordinator does, a planner's going to do for you too. There's just a lot of extra stuff that the planner does, which is why wedding professionals charge more for full planning than they do for coordination, because there's just more stuff that they do toward the beginning and throughout the planning process. Whereas the coordinator really starts, some of them start the month of your wedding. Some of them start more like 6 weeks before your wedding. I actually usually start like 2 to 3 months before your wedding, really working on it and like starting to get information from you and crafting your timeline and things like that, which again is why you cannot call this day of coordination, because that's just not a thing. It doesn't exist. Nobody does day of coordination. Even if they say they do it, they're not really doing day of coordination. They're doing some longer time period. And a lot of people do call it month of coordination, even if they do like 2 months worth. So I just call mine wedding coordination because I don't like to put a time limit on it. It is what it is. So next week, like I said, I will be back to talk about how what I just described is different from a venue coordinator, a person who works for your wedding venue and provides coordination services. Because even though you might think that you're getting what I just described, you're not. You're getting something totally different, which is why I want to take a whole episode to describe that to you. So I will be back next week to talk about that. And until then, let me know if you have any questions or about this or about anything else. And I'm always happy to answer questions. And if it's something that I can talk coherently about for 10 or so minutes, I might even do a whole video about it in the future. So hit me up on Instagram or on YouTube. All right, be back next week. Bye for now.